A very good afternoon to all of you. I hope this past session, the post-lunch session, was instructive, informative, and lulled you from any slumber post-lunch. What we have coming up in the next hour is, I think, a one-of-a-kind discussion. We have 4 extremely talented individuals here who've seen India and her discontents from very different lenses. And we have the chance to hear from them, their take, and the path ahead. Before hearing from them, I thought I might take a couple of minutes to just share 3 major observations. First, if you look at the center of gravity of the world from an economic standpoint, over the last 2,000 years, that has been moving quite dramatically. It started off somewhere in the modern Afghanistan area and moved westwards after about 1,500 years, or 1,600 years, right? The Indian and Chinese civilizations dominated the world economy for that period, and then both civilizations missed the Industrial Revolution. And the 350 years that followed, the center of gravity, the economic center of gravity, moved west to somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. And over the last 30 to 40 years, it's begun to move back east. And the sense is over the next decade, perhaps 15 years, it will reclaim its old position, perhaps slightly west of where it began. And that begins to signal a reascension, if you will, of India and China, 2 old civilizations reasserting themselves in the modern world. Specifically, what this means for India is we will reclaim our prosperity. I certainly grew up in an India that was an environment of scarcity, license Raj and so on and so forth. But I think my daughter, who's 12, is growing up in an India of prosperity. And over the next 10 or 15 years, I suspect we will create more wealth in India than we have in the last 70 years. And that's in many ways very energizing, but it's also quite scary. Scary because a lot of our public goods, education, healthcare, urban governance, public infrastructure, are not necessarily of the same quality of a superpower that we are very close to becoming. That's one observation I'd love to just place in front of everybody for discussion. Second, we're also living in a very interesting and scary time globally. The world seems to be polarizing like never before. There is a consistent wave over the last 2 to 3 years of growing macho nationalism. We certainly saw that in India when the BJP government came to power with an absolute majority. We began to see the trend with Brexit. It moved to Trump. We are seeing Erdogan in Turkey, Marine Le Pen. There's a bunch of this right-wing, majoritarian, macho nationalism that seems to be rearing its head. And this is no longer just a single event. This seems to be a trend that's happening. And that has to give us pause to wonder what is going on and what it means for the journey ahead. And the third observation is India's position herself, right? As I said, prosperity, and on the cusp of being a superpower, yet perhaps our infrastructure is that akin to a banana republic, crumbling, falling apart, with a foundation that appears weak. In the context of these 3 observations, here are 4 respected journalists, decorated and celebrated authors, but more importantly for our discussion today, very insightful commentators. Akshaya here has looked at India from a religious and caste perspective in his acclaimed and celebrated book, where he's chronicled the Gita press at some degree of detail. And that's a very interesting lens through which to look at India. Josy has written a very courageous book on corruption. Corruption in India at the highest levels of the greatest magnitude. And he spent about 10 years assimilating this work. Somini has spent time overseas, time in India, and as a bureau chief of New York Times has seen India between 2005 and today in a both up cycle as well as a down cycle. But more interestingly, she's in her book chronicled the aspirational view of what she calls the noon times children, right? People that were born post-liberalization, talks about their aspiration. It's a very different lens with which to look at India. And Sanjay, of course, has had a ringside view to the inner workings of a government, spent lots of time up close and personal with the Prime Minister of the country, and that's a very interesting lens with which to look at India. So I think we're quite fortunate to have such an illustrious panel with such diverse perspectives here, and we are keen to hear from you. Maybe Akshay, you can kick us off with your view of where you see India and what you see as some opportunities and challenges.
Hello. Yeah. Basically, I'll confine myself to this religion and caste that you spoke of, and how some of the things which, as one of the parallel story of globalization has always been that caste and religion will take the back seat. What my book tries to do is about a small publishing house, a big publishing house from a small town, yeah, how its reach impacted throughout India, and how the narrative or the worldview or the India of the future that they looked for has in a way culminated in many ways, showed result in 2014. In fact, this Gita Press that I'm talking about celebrated 2014 when the election results came out, and they said that, look, finally our time has come. And what has been the basis, what has been the, so to speak, the core of this press? Religion and caste. Caste in the most, the most conservative way that you can think of. They still talk of Chaturvarna system. They still say that if you're born, if you're born out of these four castes, if you are a Sudra, this is because of the misdeeds of the previous life. So you do something in this life so that you are born upper caste in the next life. At the same time, this is also a publishing house which has been kind of started by very rich Marwari businessmen. So at they talk about what we call liberalization. They talk of decontrol. In fact, they're publishing their monthly journal called Kalyan, which was otherwise a journal for Bhakti, Gyan or Vairagya. Time and again, whenever the business will be hit, they'll be hitting at the government. And be it during the movement in Bengal, in the Nakshal movement, be it immediately after independence, when they thought too much of control was being exercised by the Nehru government. So, but caste, this whole conservative views on caste, religion, along with the liberalization of business, is what's been their story. They will talk of liberalization, then they will talk of ban on, cow slaughter. So that's been the kind of story, and that partly explains the success of this publishing house. It has a huge currency in North India. Even in South, they have been very successful in terms of bringing their journal to ordinary Hindu homes through their other religious texts. So I don't know if liberalization or that we're talking about will take away caste, religion from our public space. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's happening. Every election, we see whichever state is there, its caste and religion comes to play a big role in some way or the other. So that, in a way, sums up my view on religion and caste and the role that small press, something like Gita Press can play, and how, it's a long process. They started doing something in 1926. In 2014, they realized that finally it has happened, and they're happy about it. The larger issue is this whole, and we see a lot of what they say coming back into our narrative. For instance, the entire argument during Love Jihad in 2014-15, we found the same kind of arguments we were hearing in 2014-15, which this conservative set gave at the time of Hindu Code Bill. The same kind of, what we dismiss as lunatic fringe, have actually taken main stage, and they articulate the same worldview. And in a way, it's getting more and more normal to talk about these things. It's getting more and more, I don't know whether it has acceptance, but things which we wouldn't have thought about, say, even 5 years back, have come back, resurfaced. And what I'm trying to say is that the arguments on caste and religion have not changed at all. And this is a very, very conservative, very, very highly orthodox view on caste and religion, which have taken have taken center stage along with this whole liberalization story.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk about whether they have gained currency broadly. I think it's an important point you've touched. Josy, your take.
My book, A Feast of Vultures, is more looking at how we have failed to reimagine governance in the ever since we won independence, and the ills of governance that we inherited have only been accentuated after the liberalization era. In fact, my take is that everything in this country is today on sale. Most institutions, and the whispers are getting louder about institutions only. So we are not as a mature, strong liberal democracy yet, and our celebrations just using large elections is misplaced. I think we are in a state of crisis, and the crisis has resulted in India not only registering one of the world's fastest economic growth, but also in India becoming home to the world's largest population of illiterates. Almost 280 million people go out every morning to defecate in the open, and an innumerable number of cruelty happens there against women and children. 70% of India, which is a majority who lives in rural areas, have been neglected. Our urban infrastructure is crumbling, not because we do not have money. There is a lot of money in this country, but we are a rich country of too many poor people. I think there is a grand conspiracy to distort the narrative, and that conspiracy involves the politicians, many of who are real bullshitters, if I may say, and corporate chieftains who are largely robber barons, and the elite, all of us, the English-speaking elite, who have together, we have cornered a vast majority of India's welfare and wealth and facilities, and we have distorted narrative as the world's largest democracy, as a great civilization which is trying to bring welfare to poor, which is actually not the case. There may be welfare programs on paper, there may be annual budgets being presented, there may be political leaders who are claiming various things, but the reality is that we have created a large, complex, dark web of middlemen, intermediaries who can swing anything for you in the system. You want a government contract, pay the commission, you get the contract. You want to fix an appointment, pay the right money to the right people. You want a seat to fight an election, pay the right money to the right politician. Everything is on sale. So I think we have entered an era of great discontent, and the problems is getting worse by the day because of the fact that we are a very young country. The median age is just about 25.2. So you have about 650 million people below the age of 25 who are growing up on the hope of great dreams, and they are hitting against this wall created by the elders like us who are exploiting and who are vultures feeding on the welfare of this country.
Somini, Josy paints a somewhat gloomy and cynical picture, and I'll come back. I have a couple of bones to pick with him on that. But you chronicle the story of 7 aspiring Indians whose aspiration levels you find energizing yet stifling in some ways. Talk to us about how you see India just now.
So I'm a newspaper reporter, so I engage in that old-fashioned currency of facts, evidence. So I'm just going to remind you all of something that you know. For every 110 boys that are born today, 100 girls are born, or rather, they're allowed to be born. Their fetuses aren't thrown into the back of an unused well or buried on some unused farm. Those who are allowed to be born, girls under the age of 5, are much more likely to be clinically, measurably underweight. This you know because in many families, girls are much less likely to be given milk or ghee or an egg or even lentils. They are certainly much less likely to be taken to a doctor when they fall ill. And these are culled from studies and surveys that have been done again and again in all parts of the country. As they grow up, a vast majority of Indian women grow up to be anemic, which means that they get tired in the middle of the day. They cannot achieve their full potential. As they get educated, and this is a remarkable thing, there are as many girls and boys at least enrolled in primary school for the first time in independent India's history. That's remarkable. Women's literacy is higher than it's ever been. However, when they get to be working age, women's labor force participation is far lower than it ought to be with how many women are educated and with the country's level of economic development. And this is a puzzle. You know, this is a puzzle that I'm sure we all have some anecdotal convictions on. You know, why aren't women allowed to go and work outside the home? And I tell you all this for the following reason. I tell you all this because there are practical implications of this. No country, India or any other country, can achieve its economic potential, its political ambitions, by leaving half its population so neglected, by not fulfilling its original promise of equality under the law to half its population. But there's also a psychic dimension of this. Not only does it hurt 50% of the population to not be treated with dignity, with respect, with some measure of equality, I think it also fundamentally dehumanizes men. I think no country can achieve its potential when half its population is encouraged to be boorish and to not be nurturing and to be strong men. I think that absolutely stands in the way of India's ambitions. And I write about this not in some grand way in the book, but just through the lives of 7 young people, some of whom I followed for many years.
Thank you. Sanjay, these guys have painted their stories. Everything culminates to the political class in some way, shape, or form. You've had a ringside view, as I said. Your thoughts on where you see India today, particularly post-liberalization, and what some opportunities and challenges are?
Well, like Somini, I like facts. So let me put out some facts. You know, Joan Robinson, who was one of our great economists of the last century, guru of many of my teachers, once very famously said in the 1960s, that every statement about India and its opposite is true. We are a nation of contradictions. We are a nation of diversities. There's the good and the bad. When a famous American journalist, Catherine Mayo, came to India and wrote about all the bad things in India, Mahatma Gandhi described it as the drain inspector's report. And it's part of our job of journalists, in fact, to do inspection of the drains. And so a lot of what we write is about, you know, the nasty stuff. That's necessary. But that's not the only thing happening. You asked me the question about last 25 years. My book, 1991, which has recently been released, documents the events of 91. But I think the 2 important events of 91, if you look at the last 25 years and see how they've evolved, it's fascinating that the evolution on both fronts has been unidirectional. The first important change of 91 was a change in the economic framework. Everybody who was not in government criticized the government of the day. The left and the right, the BJP and the communists. But since 1991, every single political party in this country has been in power in Delhi in one way or another and had the power to make some changes in the policies of 91, and nobody has reversed any policy. So the fact number 1 is that the movement on the economic front has been unidirectional. There are 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, some ups, some downs, some years of high growth, like during UPA 1, some years of low growth, like during UPA 2, etc. The second important change that happened, which you alluded to, was a fundamental change in the global order. It triggered by the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it was also, in a sense, the arrival of China on the world stage. And in 91, the arrival of India on the world stage. And the first thing you mentioned, that the shift from the west to the east has gone on inexorably over the last 25 years. Again, two steps forward, one step backward, ups and downs. But I don't think today anybody can deny, but by the end of the 21st century, this movement will happen. We are seeing the repercussions of this in Western societies. The earlier session here was about the traumatic political events in the United States, and one could say similar things about Europe. But those societies are coming to grips with their decline. And we in the East are coming to grips with our rise. And there are problems on both fronts. It's not as if the decline would be secular, it's not as if the rise would be secular. There would be again two steps forward, one step backward in those countries, just as there would be here. On balance, I think the journey India has made in the last 25 years has been a very creditable journey. Yes, there's a problem of the girl child. But yes, more girls are studying in schools today. More women are in the public space today. Yes, there is corruption. But yes, there is more exposure of that corruption today. Yet, yes, there is communal identification of different communities. But there is more contention with that today. So in every sphere, like Joan Robinson said, you can make a statement and make its opposite, and both would be true. And that's the nature of this society. And I do not see that changing.
Thank you. As a hardcore optimist, I tend to see the glass half full like you, but I do want to come back to Josy. The performance of the country, in some ways, over the last 25 years, I think facts will bear us out that our GDP has grown. We are, in PPP terms, the third largest economy in the world. You know, across multiple sectors, we've made significant progress. But you seem to suggest, while performance has been great, the health of the country is not in order. Talk a little bit more, and maybe we can get a discussion going on that front.
No, I don't disagree with anything that Sanjay Baru said, because, as he said, it's factual. But my concern and our concern should be not about having that 8 or 10 point PowerPoint presentation celebrating India, having a Muslim president and a Christian leader and all that crap. I think we should talk about facts. The core fact of the matter is the reality that our democratic institutions are slowly degenerating. The economic gains that we have made has been concentrated in a very appalling manner in a very small minority. 1% of India's richest holds almost 58% of its wealth, right? If you look at the bank loans, 90-95% of the bank loans have been taken up by a few business houses and families, right? Farmers commit suicide because they can't pay off 30 or 40,000 rupees loan that they've taken. But the corporates who have taken up over 1 lakh crore rupees are celebrated as, and who have defaulted bank loans are prime ministers. I'm not talking about just this prime minister, every prime minister's pet and advisor. We have a young country where, you know, every sweet shop owner and cycle rickshaw wala, everybody is opening a university, and ghost principals are running principals, ghost professors and doctors are teaching medicine, and we are churning out professionals who are of no use. She spoke about women. You know, the women workforce in the formal workforce in India today is just less than 25%, which is almost as bad as maybe Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan. What are we talking? Are we talking about the numbers? Then let's talk about the real numbers. 70% of India do not live in the urban centers. Majority, right? Majority of Indians are young, below the age of 25. Have you provided them education? No. We are talking about the welfare of you and me, the salaries that we are earning. And if we tell our salaries to the poor out there, the majority of Indians, they will die of heart attack. So I am saying that this, there are several parallels to it. Look at Latin America in the 80s and, whenever there have been economic reforms happening. Look at the East Asian stories in the 90s when all the great commentators came and said, tiger economy, what wonderful things are happening. And when it melted down, nobody was there. The analysts all ran away. Right? So I am just saying that I am not disputing any of the facts of your GDP growth or other numbers. But put your hand on your heart and look at and ask yourself that what is the extra cost that you have built into doing clean business? Other day I sat with a mining company CEO. Do you know that a mining company is paying in the range of 20 to 30% extra money to middlemen? A defense deal in this country requires 15 to 20% extra bribe. Our political parties are the world's largest black money operations. We are much bigger than Mexican drug mafia. And where are the questions? Last Lok Sabha election, official market estimates said 24,000 crores will be spent during the Lok Sabha elections. When the parties declared their expenses, BJP said something like 900 crore rupees and Congress said some 650 crore rupees. So where did the rest of the money come from?
I suspect you know the answer to that question, but let me, because he spent a lot of time over the last 10 years hanging out with middlemen of various shades of color, right? So I think he may have a sense, but maybe we can chat offline about it. But Somini, I want to, structurally, we are not too dissimilar to where the United States was in the baby boomer years, right? And as you rightly point out, we have an aspiring class now that is getting increasingly demanding. And it is not small in number, it is significant in number. And I think, if I remember right, you say there's 1 million youngsters, 18-year-olds getting added every year or every month?
Every month, 1 million Indians turn 18.
Turn 18, right? So that's a fairly significant...
Which is an astonishing youth bulge. And India today is home to the largest number of young people in any country at any point in time in recorded human history.
And we will get younger for the next 25, 30 years, and we will be the youngest country up until 2040. Right? And so that's
at a time when the rest of the world is aging, when the rich world particularly is aging, and even China, because of its one-child policy, is also aging. India is really, the largest concentration of young people anywhere, and which is all the more reason why paying attention to...
But it's not 18-year-olds the way Josy and I were when we were 18 years old. Right? We were a very different set of 18-year-olds when we were part of that number, right? I suspect the 18-year-olds today are far more demanding, far more risk-taking, far more aware, and that creates in a democracy a set of citizens that will not take crap, to quote my learned friend here.
Look,
no?
Whenever you have a country experiencing this youth bulge, you're going to have turmoil, tumult, because that's what a concentration of young people, not just children, but young people who are coming into the economy, who are registering to vote, who are, in today's case, embracing the internet for the first time, you're bound to have a very demanding citizenry. And in our case, in the case of the United States, remember, the baby boom years resulted in enormous social change. Same for Europe, enormous social change. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that in this country. I wouldn't draw a direct parallel because, of course, in India there are very different communities with very different demands. But the one thing that I think this generation has in common, and the reason why I call them noonday's children or high noon's children as opposed to midnight's children, is precisely because they are so hungry, they are so red hot, demanding, impatient. You can smell it everywhere. Also, because when I was based in Delhi, everywhere I would go, to the nail salon, to the cafe, to the corner store, they would call me auntie. And I was not quite prepared to be called auntie, to tell you the truth. But of course, I am an auntie by India's demographic standards. So that became the focus of the book.
And Akshay, as you look at these noonday's children, more aware, more affluent, more influential in many ways, are you seeing religion, caste, some of the cobwebs that we guys grew up with? Is it still, alive and kicking? Is it waning? What's your sense?
Yeah, it is there, but depends which 18-year-old you're talking about too, rural 18-year-old, semi-urban, Delhi boy, Bombay boy. So it depends. We saw in the last 1 year the kind of marches which were taken out by 18-year-olds, which was very, what Somini is saying, young population in Gujarat, in Maharashtra. Maharashtra was of a very different nature, but it was all somewhere religion and caste were playing a big role in it. Some had the angst of being excluded. Some had the angst of not getting the right reservation. So religion and caste has not really gone. Especially, and why I would say that, and in a very lot of these young people I see on social media, it emanates from a great deal of illiteracy on religion, because everything has to be confined in 140 characters. So if you're saying something, some people who have not even read your book, have not seen your body of work, will come abuse you. Because if you've said anything which is outside the mainstream, which doesn't fall into the mainstream narrative. So these 18-year-olds, I'm not putting on 18-year-olds, there's a whole bunch of, this is the age group that forms majority of the trolls of various parties. Even Aam Aadmi Party has a lot of trolls. BJP, of course, has mastered it. We just saw a book which has come out. So, and these are the 18, and why are they doing it? I've asked few of them, and they come from very good background, educational background. Where is this whole thing on religion and caste coming from? Which is kind of
the answer
baffling.
you get?
Answer, no. They say, you know, this, without even knowing, reading, they'll say, oh, this reservation is bad. Why should this happen? You know, in India, there should be no, all castes are same. When you tell them there is a historical, you know, it has not happened overnight. You know, there is a reason why some people are getting reservation, or what certain castes have gone through in the last 5,000 years. They're not willing to listen. Oh, come on, that was in the past, forget about it now. So you can see it all reflecting in our trolls, in our day-to-day interaction with people, and it's highly intolerant. The problem is that no one wants to engage with another one. And this 18, 24-year-olds that we are talking about, a lot of them have this problem, and they are the one who populate the social media scene now.
So just to put young Indians in perspective, when compared to other countries around the world, India remains one of the most religious societies, repeatedly in public opinion polls. It remains one of the most conservative, socially conservative, including among young people. And a recent world survey, international survey that I saw also noted that India was among those countries where young people polled question democracy. And this could also be said of young people in Putin's Russia. It could certainly be said of young people in China. And I think the kind of generalized cynicism and frustration with political institutions and a kind of vague elite that you see all over the world, you are seeing some of that certainly in India. And certainly the brand of hard right, very macho, as we were talking about in the back, a very macho form of nationalism. You see an arc that goes all around the world, from China to Russia to Hungary to Turkey to the Philippines, and of course, not least in the world's most powerful country, the United States. So in some ways, India is far more advanced. We've got nothing on you, right? So for now several years, you've seen a kind of glorification of a faded past, something that you are writing about, you know, a nostalgia for a faded past that privileged some people and utterly maligned and discriminated against others. You're seeing very toxic speech that had been kind of kept in wraps, in polite conversation, but that has been given license by political leaders. You are seeing very toxic attitudes and outright violence against women, including on social media. The trolls particularly attack women who happen to have a public voice, and you're seeing a kind of generalized frustration with the political class. Corruption is at the heart of that. So in some ways, you are far ahead of where we are in the United States. Equally, you also hold some lessons for us and for Europe with the rise of the far right on dissent, because India, in fact, has a very, very rich tradition of dissent, and can perhaps show the rest of us some path forward.
Sanjaya, you're vigorously nodding your head.
Cynicism with the political class. Come on, we have a higher voter turnout in this country than most other democracies. People don't go and vote if they are cynical, right? Look,
but who do they vote for? Do they vote for
relevant.
Someone who? No, I think that's very relevant.
I'm sorry. If you are cynical, you don't vote. You don't believe in the system. You don't vote for the system. But the fact that the voter turnout is only increasing in the last few years, it has gone up, suggests that people think there is at least one way in which I register whatever my preference is. So we overdo this cynicism of the political class too much, particularly in the media. I think there is much greater political engagement in India today, even among the young. The voter turnout of the young, statistics show, is higher than the voter turnout of the old, which was incidentally the case even in the United States. People are engaged. They are engaged in a variety of ways. A lot of this stuff about, rape and violence against women, a lot of it is now driven by TRPs. I have gone and tried to find out from so many of these examples. Just yesterday evening, we were talking to someone from Bangalore who's here about the incidents in Bangalore. And every time you go and find out, look, what are the facts? And you realize what the television reports is 100 times the fact. And so there is a distortion and exaggeration of the negativity. So I'm not disagreeing with the downside. I mean, as I said, there is upside and the downside. There are a lot of downside. But I don't think we are so far ahead of all these other rotten countries that you talk about. We are within the mean.
Just to the last point, it is certainly true that violence against women does not seem to be any greater or lesser in India as compared to other countries. The reported incidence of violence against women, sexual and otherwise, roughly mirrors what women across the world say. And it's very high. I mean, something like 33% of women in their lifetimes have experienced an act of violence, whether sexual or otherwise. India stands roughly at that number. However, the attention on sexual violence in particular has certainly risen in the last 3 or 4 years in India. And I, for one, think that reflects a very good thing. Because that reflects women not keeping quiet about it anymore. I don't think it's necessarily gone up or gone down, but I don't think that Indian women are keeping that hidden in shame and self-doubt and self-hate anymore.
Fascinating. I do want to come back and given that all 4 of you are journalists, I do want to come back and talk about the responsibility of journalists at a time like this in India. But before that, maybe the audience would like to ask a few questions. Yeah, maybe I saw his hand first, so if it's okay. Oh, go ahead, you have the mic. Why don't you start and we'll give him a mic next. Go ahead, sir, in the blue shirt.
Sir, in 1947, in India voluntarily chose the socialist path. In 1991, when it did not work, it abandoned socialism and it is embracing capitalism. We can't talk about discontent of a nation if somebody imposed these policies from outside. We voluntarily chose these policies, now we are talking about discontents. Why did he choose the wrong policies in the first place in 1947 itself?
Mr. Baru, I think you should give a view. we completely defer to you.
Well, you know, I mean, these words don't mean anything. In 1947, we did not accept a socialist system. It was very much a mixed economy. There's a thriving private sector. The whole of agriculture was in the private sector. Large parts of trade were in the private sector. Manufacturing, you had to have a substantial public sector, which in fact the private sector wanted. You read the Bombay Plan written by J.R.D. Tata, G.D. Birla and others. They asked for more public investment. The problem was that in the 60s and 70s, all of this got distorted and we created a highly bureaucratic system that contributed to organized corruption with industrial licensing, etc. And what 91 did was to get rid of that and to allow private enterprise to do business. I mean, I have some stories in some of what I have written about the kind of change 91 brought about. So it's not just you suddenly abandon socialism and embrace capitalism, but you abandoned a bureaucratic system that was no longer delivering results and allowed private sector to greater freedom. And the facts again are that they did deliver in terms of rise of a new, completely new business communities, particularly in southern India, in Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, became centers of a new businesses.
Thank you. Sir, go ahead, sir.
Many feel that the English media should do better. Kareena Kapoor Khan's getting a baby gets first page news. Firing Agni missiles is relegated to page 6. And politicians, they are not better. Rahul Gandhi, whom I call as Rahul Kalam Gandhi, and Mamata Banerjee I call as Mamata Pudcha Banerjee. Their actions, reactions are real shame to the country, and they should behave better. And you in the press, with such a lot of power, should whip them up and make them behave.
Thank you, sir. I think it's a question on English journalism. Are we hitting the ball on the money, or are we missing it wildly? And Josy, maybe you should.
I have a point to make. Very frankly, I think a lot of people who are tolerant of criticism of the government until about 2014 are extremely intolerant today when we criticize a government, because our job is to be the adversary to the establishment. We are not PROs for the government.
Yeah.
The adversarial role that we played with great flourish when I was with Akshaya in Times of India, if you look back, it is our stories which created the anti-corruption. And most of these stories that we did, whether it's Adarsh Commonwealth Games or 2G license scam, etc., it is our stories that created the India Against Corruption movement. We gave significant flow of push to it. But today when the same bylines write stories against establishment, we are abused because I have a surname by Joseph, though I don't go to church, which I can't tell the priest and my parents. We are abused because we have a Christian name, or we are abused for being a woman, whatever. So I am saying that the media is trying to, at least a good number of media. I work for the Hindu, I have changed 8 jobs. I can tell you, in the Hindu newsroom, I have not had a single instruction not to write against anybody. And I don't practice self-censorship. But when my stories come out, the curtains on me, the attack on me is not from the office, not from my editor or the promoters, but it is from those readers who, till 3 years ago, celebrated the stories I did. And that is sad. I think we need to learn to look facts and truth in its eye and deal with it. As Somini said, if you have only 25% of the women in workforce, formal workforce, then you have a fundamental problem. If your political parties are splurging money, then Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi and Mamata Banerjee, all of them are equal culprits in it. We need to fight all of them. We can't distinguish. Just because somebody gives flourished rhetoric promising to be an honest politician, he is not.
So there's a half-serious saying about journalists that I like to sometimes remind myself of. If you're a journalist, or a reporter, as in my case, you work all the time, you get paid pretty badly, but hey, everyone hates you.
My question is about demonetization, when it happened in Venezuela, and it was withdrawn because of the people's bad response. And in India, it had so much bad consequences, as we all know, but there was no revolt. Doesn't that happen in India, just like it happened in Venezuela?
You know, I've been saying, in fact, I've just written a column for the week. This is a subject for serious study. I urge Indian social scientists, I hope some of them at least stood in those queues over the last 2 months outside the banks and the ATMs, talked to people, did interviews, did surveys. I urge Indian sociologists and political scientists to come out with an intelligent analysis of what happened at the level of social engagement in civil society over the last 2 months. It's an incredible story. I can predict today that some American sociologist will write a book before any one of us does. Because nothing like this has happened before. You withdraw 86% of cash from the system, force every person to stand in a queue. I'm sure you did. I have stood in queues. I can tell you the kind of conversations. I wish I was a reporter. I wish I was a journalist. The kind of conversations one hears 3-4 hours standing in a queue with people of different social backgrounds, men, women, young, old. And these conversations have happened across the country over the last 2 months. This is rich sociological material to understand why is it we have not had a single bus burnt. We have not had a single bank attacked with stones. We have not had a single dharna. We have not had a single gherao. We have not had a single Rasta Roko. Why? Why did ordinary Indians go through the pain? And it was tremendous pain. There's no question about it. People have suffered. They've suffered not just standing in queues. They've suffered loss of income. They've suffered loss of employment. And that media has been reporting. All the downside has been reported. But the sociological story is, despite all these problems, why has the opposition, for example, not succeeded in mobilizing this anger into anything big? So there is something about this country that we need to understand what is happening.
No, it's not that banks were not heralded or a lot of things didn't happen. It's just that media didn't report most. I'm being in newsroom. Being in a newsroom of a big newspaper, I can say that
Akshay,
many of things didn't get reported.
Akshay, you are a journalist. This is an indictment of the entire media, which I will not accept.
No, it is not. It is not.
No,
it is
because
not. Social media reported it.
No, if
a lot of it, many of these.
They're sporadic. Akshay, look, as I said, go back to Joan Robinson. But even then. No, I'm not saying 0% reportage. But look, what is the magnitude? It's the magnitude.
What is certainly clear, there's perhaps not enough reportage. I think we can go back and look at the facts, and the reality is there's not much reportage. There might be stuff on social media. No, the facts are the facts, no? We can't make stuff up. But I think the bigger question to ask and ponder about is why didn't we have an Arab Spring equivalent? Why didn't we have a Tiananmen Square equivalent? If there was so much pressure cooker building up, and Josy, you talk about this.
Yeah, can I just...
Why hasn't, to answer this young gentleman's question, why hasn't there been greater outrage?
No, India is a large pressure cooker. It takes some time to pressure to build up. The pressure is building up. Wait for it.
If you don't mind 1 minute, Sharad Pawar said this. Sharad Pawar said the other day, in an interview to Economic Times, he said, I'm reminded of the emergency. When the emergency was declared, ordinary people were all happy and quiet. It took 1.5 years for the anger to build up, and the government was voted out. But hello, at the declaration of the emergency, the entire political opposition was put in jail, except the CPI leadership. Here you had the entire political leadership on television, organizing rallies, protesting in parliament, and yet they failed. Now, I'm not for or against. I'm saying for a sociologist, this is a subject for serious analysis.
Sure. It is.
People are thinking it is a measure against the threat. That is why they bear all the inconveniences. And another question is,
That's interesting.
how to fix the problem of the nation? Do we want more reforms? Are the reforms responsible for the decline in our economy? What is the solution for the problem? What the panelists advocate?
At least what I'm hearing, it's a large pressure cooker. There's a lot of biryani that will get made in due course. Josy, is there a short answer to that? What are the solutions? Maybe one.
Sir, the solution is reforms and more reforms. You know, we inherited the bureaucratic setup from the British, an empire which wanted to control a large country using a few thousand people, right? And what is that bold imagination that we have done to governance? Maybe Panchayati Raj system, but Panchayati Raj system, such half-baked ideas have only added yet another layer of corruption. It is not that the government is not spending enough money. Government is spending money, but the money is not reaching the real beneficiaries. Right? So I think only reforms and more pressure on the politicians. Demonetization being a step against corruption, I have got my doubts because if you really look at it, they are talking about just about 4,000 crore rupees of suspect transactions. In my book, I've recorded just one story of Adani Group, which took out 5,600 crore rupees in the name of electricity generation equipment purchase and taken to Mauritius. Well documented. So government could have either recovered the money from Adani's or from the all of us standing in queues. So I think that's your choice.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. My name is Umesh. So if you see the Indian demographics, it's not uniform all over. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari, the demographics are always unequal. And we have the same policy for all over the country. You see, if you talk about reservation, if there is inequality, we may need reservation. But how? To whom? You see, if a Delhi guy or a metro guy who hasn't faced any inequality or something like that, they are at equal level. All men are equal, they are at equal level. And we are pulling them back. There was caste system, there was inequality.
Can I ask you to ask a question, please? There are multiple people, so ask your question if you don't mind.
So, there was demographics are non-uniform. So, I think we need the policies depending on the ground level. And one more thing is, if you want policies, their politicians must change. But the politicians are elected based on the number of freebies they give. They're deliberately depriving the citizens so that they all depend. So never we can be independent, never we can elect the same politicians, and so the policies can never be reformed. So
sorry to cut you off.
My question is, I'm coming to my question. My question is, so can you panelists see any way out here? I don't see any way out. So policies are framed by politicians and the elected.
So here's my suggestion. I suggest you engage with your local MLA, local councillor, local member of parliament. That's where it starts. As citizens in a democracy, if we don't engage, there's no chance of any reform happening. Yeah. So as a young man, I would very much urge you to do that. Let me take two more questions. So one here, I think there's a mic already, and then there's a gentleman in a blue T-shirt in the back who's been standing for quite some time. A blue shirt, you sir. So if you don't mind, we can chat maybe a little. I'm running out of time. Go ahead, sir, with the mic.
As the panel is on nation and its discontents, and with Mr. Baru, Dr. Baru, now as you depicted the trajectories of change, unidirectional change, what has been our record in terms of institutional transformations? For example, economic reforms not being accompanied by institutional transformations. So if you reflect upon that, that brings us, all of us, to think about the transformational challenges. As some panelists refer to our demographic population in terms of young age, I would also like to make us think about the challenge of values and value education and what role the media and society need to play in terms of addressing this challenge of value transformation of the young generation.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Maybe on Dr. Baru, a quick comment on institutional reforms that you're seeing in the country.
Well, the fact is that every single institution is in crisis. The executive, the parliament, the judiciary, the media, the education system, the health system, all our institutions are dealing with humongous challenges and unable to cope with them. but that provides us an opportunity. I think that is the kind of social engagement that this country demands of all of us, and in the next decade, we need to improve the functioning of these institutions if we want to go forward.
Thank you. Maybe one last question in the end there.
How much of tolerance in India is attributable to the Goebbelsian myth of Achhe Din?
Can you repeat the last part of your question, please?
How much of Indian tolerance is dependent on the Goebbelsian theory of Achhe Din?
I think you foxed our panel. Yeah, I think we're all certainly waiting for Achhe Din, as Josy says, but any quick comment from any of you on that? I think there's something to chat about over a cup of coffee later. Sir, one last question, given that that was a very brief one.
Is it not unfortunate that the credibility of RBI has come for questioning, even by the ex-governors, as a corollary to the demonetization? Is it not unfortunate?
Not just RBI, not just RBI. Sir, at least some of us who took on the last government and were perpetually after them for compromising institutions, we thought that we'll move forward, but the country is going backwards in almost all organizations. You know, yesterday I happened to interview an IAS officer who was awarded by the Prime Minister gold medal for being a good public administrator. He was hounded out by the present government because he was Arvind Kejriwal's principal secretary. Now, he says one DIG in CBI is telling him, a senior IAS officer, that you name Arvind Kejriwal and we'll let you free. You look at SIT on black money, I don't know what they're digging at, nothing is coming out. You come to Delhi and listen to the whispers about judicial appointments. We have a serious crisis. And it's far more than what is being reported.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to put our panelists on the spot and ask for one forward-looking idea. We all agree India has a lot of hope. We all agree India has a lot of challenges. We are uniquely poised. One idea that you would advocate and share with us, forward-looking.
Follow Indian Constitution in letter and spirit.
I will add to it one more thing. We need to bring in parliamentary accountability to all institutions. With all its drawback, there is no better representative of India than Indian Parliament.
Thank you.
Akshay took my thunder. No, I think that those of us who I lived in India for many years and now live back in the United States, and I can't help but wonder whether India's proud tradition of respect for difference, and I don't want to say intolerance exactly, but the battle against intolerance, whether that isn't the most important thing in the years ahead, not just for India, but for, as you know, India's image in the world as well.
Thank you. Dr. Baru?
No, that's a tough one, but I guess I'll resort to Mahatma Gandhi and say, be the change that you want to see.
I thought I would ask the questions. No, but I think, we are uniquely poised, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm an eternal optimist and a very proud Indian. I see the glass half full. To me, I think two things need to happen. We need an engaged citizenry in the democracy holding our politicians accountable. That needs to happen. And I think urgently the media, certainly the print media, needs to move away from chasing eyeballs, TRPs, GRPs, move away from the business of advertising to chasing the professional of journalism. If these two things happen, I think we can actually get to a very good place as a country. On that note, let me thank our panelists for their time and perspective here. And to all of you, our engaged audience, for humoring us. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting and thought-provoking session. Ladies and gentlemen, please note that Akshaya Mukul, Josy Joseph, Sanjaya Baru, and Somini Sengupta will be available for a book signing right outside the auditorium now.